You know what's fascinating about human connection? It's that we often find ourselves magnetically drawn to the very people who challenge our emotional wiring. The avoidant and the super empath, they are two sides of a deeply emotional coin. One runs from feelings, the other runs toward them. One fears being consumed, the other fears being abandoned, and somehow these two keep finding their way back to each other. The avoidant person doesn't hate connection. In fact, they crave it more than they'll ever admit. But connection feels dangerous to them. It threatens their sense of control, their independence, their carefully built emotional armor. So when they meet someone who sees through their defenses, who meets their silence with understanding instead of anger, who offers love without pressure, it shakes them. That someone is the super empath. The super empath is rare. They love deeply, notice everything, and give without asking for much in return. They have an almost supernatural ability to sense emotional undercurrents. When an avoidant pulls away, the super empath doesn't immediately chase or collapse, they hold steady. That calm, that emotional intelligence is disarming. For the avoidant, it's like meeting someone who speaks a language they didn't even know they understood. At first, the avoidant leaves, it's their pattern. They disappear, convinced that distance will give them peace. But then something happens no one else feels quite like the super empath. No one else makes them feel safe and seen at the same time. They start to remember how it felt to be accepted without being controlled, to be loved without being suffocated, and that memory pulls them back every single time. You see, avoidants don't come back because of guilt or habit. They come back because, deep down, they know that what the super empath offered wasn't ordinary love, it was healing disguised as connection. It was the kind of love that touches the deepest part of the soul, the part even they've tried to forget exists. But here's the twist. The super empath's power isn't in always taking them back. It's in knowing that they don't need to, because the empath's gift isn't meant to be a crutch for someone else's fear. It's meant to be a mirror. A mirror that shows the avoidant what real intimacy feels like, what vulnerability can create, and how love can exist without control or fear. So yes, avoidants keep coming back not because they want to drain the super empath, but because that connection awakens something real in them. It reminds them of who they could be if they ever stopped running, and the moment the super empath realizes their own worth, their own balance, their own boundaries, that's when the dynamic truly transforms. Because love doesn't have to be a cycle of chase and retreat. It can be a space where both people grow, if they're brave enough to stay. The connection between an avoidant and a super empath often feels magnetic, almost fated, because they represent emotional opposites that complete a psychological circle. The avoidant is drawn to independence, freedom, and control. They find safety in distance. For them, closeness often equals danger, the threat of being overwhelmed, judged, or trapped in emotional chaos. On the other hand, the super empath finds safety in closeness, understanding, and connection. They don't fear intimacy, they crave it. They seek depth, emotional honesty, and the comfort of shared vulnerability. When these two meet, their differences create an irresistible pull like fire meeting water, each curious about the other's nature, each feeling something they cannot fully explain. At first, it feels like balance. The avoidant admires the empath's warmth, patience, and understanding. They're drawn to the calm presence of someone who doesn't demand too much too soon. For the avoidant, it's refreshing to meet someone who feels emotions so openly, yet never seems to lose themselves in them. The empath, in turn, is fascinated by the avoidant's quiet strength, their mystery, and their independence. There's something grounding, almost soothing, about someone who doesn't need constant reassurance. The empath feels safe in the avoidant's composure, mistaking emotional distance for emotional maturity. But beneath this attraction lies a deep emotional tension. The more the empath wants closeness, the more the avoidant feels exposed. What begins as admiration slowly becomes a challenge to their internal equilibrium. The avoidant starts to feel their emotional walls tremble under the empath's kindness, and that scares them. For someone who has spent their life equating love with loss of control, vulnerability feels like standing at the edge of a cliff, so they pull away not out of cruelty, but out of fear. They retreat to regain balance, to feel safe again inside their solitude. Meanwhile, the super empath feels this withdrawal like an emotional earthquake. They sense the shift, the silence, the subtle retreat. Yet their instinct isn't to run, it's to understand. They stay, they listen, they offer compassion instead of confrontation. That patience confuses the avoidant. Most people react to their distance with anger or neediness, but the super empath meets it with peace. That calm is foreign, even addictive. It creates a paradox where the avoidant feels both safe and vulnerable at the same time. They don't fully understand why, but they can't shake the memory of that presence. This dynamic, though difficult, reveals something profound about human nature. We are drawn to what we subconsciously need, not what we consciously prefer. The avoidant, though they fear emotional intimacy, is instinctively attracted to someone who embodies it. The super empath, though they long for connection, is drawn to someone who challenges them to define the limits of their giving. Together, they form a magnetic bond rooted in mutual lessons. One learns to soften, the other learns to hold boundaries. Their contrast isn't just chemistry, it's growth disguised as attraction, an emotional dance that keeps pulling them back to each other until both have learned what they came to find. What keeps an avoidant returning to a super empath is not the intensity of emotion, but the feeling of safety within that emotion. The avoidant is used to relationships where affection feels like obligation, where closeness quickly becomes suffocating, and where love seems conditional. They've built their defenses around the belief that intimacy equals entrapment, that giving too much of themselves means losing control. When they encounter the super empath, something unfamiliar happens. They feel deeply seen yet strangely unthreatened. The empath doesn't force vulnerability, they invite it. Their love is spacious, patient, and free of pressure. For someone who's constantly on guard, that kind of love feels like oxygen after years of emotional suffocation. The super empath's gift is their ability to hold emotional space without crowding it. They understand that not everyone moves at the same pace or expresses love in the same way. They don't interpret silence as rejection or distance as abandonment. They see it as communication in another form. This emotional intelligence becomes magnetic to the avoidant, who has often been misunderstood by others. Where most people demand explanations, the empath offers understanding. Where others react with anger or need, the empath responds with calm curiosity. This makes the avoidant feel safe enough to inch closer, even if their instinct is still to pull away. That emotional safety isn't built on submission or excessive giving. It's built on emotional maturity. This super empath doesn't need to dominate or control. They lead with empathy. They listen without fixing, love without demanding, and nurture without losing themselves. Their presence tells the avoidant, "You are free to be who you are here." And that is precisely what the avoidant has never truly believed they could be in love free. The safety the empath provides doesn't feel like a cage, it feels like permission to exhale. The avoidant begins to experience a new kind of connection, one where their independence is respected, where emotional intensity doesn't come with manipulation, and where they are valued not for how much they give, but for who they are. That subtle shift changes everything. It disarms their fear and awakens their longing. They start to realize that intimacy doesn't have to mean losing autonomy. It can mean expanding it. The super empath, without even trying, teaches them that real love isn't about control or possession. It's about coexisting safely in shared vulnerability. But what truly anchors this bond is the empath's balance between compassion and self-respect. The avoidant senses that while the empath is warm, they're not weak. They can love deeply but still walk away if the connection becomes one-sided. That quiet confidence draws the avoidant in even further. It's not just emotional safety, it's emotional integrity. The avoidant feels seen without being smothered, valued without being trapped, and loved without being changed. That's why, no matter how far they go, they keep coming back. Because in a world full of conditional affection, the super empath's love feels like the safest place they've ever known. The connection between an avoidant and a super empath is not simply emotional, it is deeply psychological and often transformative. When the avoidant meets the super empath, they are unknowingly stepping into a mirror one that reflects the parts of themselves they've spent years hiding. The empath's love doesn't just soothe, it reveals. It shows the avoidant what real intimacy feels like, what emotional presence looks like, and what it means to be accepted without pretense or defense. This reflection is powerful because the avoidant, beneath their guardedness, carries a buried longing to be seen and loved authentically. They fear vulnerability, yet they crave it. They push away closeness, yet they ache for connection. The empath, with their ability to love without conditions, gently holds that contradiction up to the light. The super empath doesn't try to fix or change the avoidant. Instead, they simply love in a way that is genuine, grounded, and patient. They communicate through consistency rather than persuasion, showing that affection doesn't have to be chaotic or suffocating. This steadiness challenges the avoidant's internal narrative that relationships always end in pain or loss of freedom. The empath's calm energy creates a sense of emotional safety, allowing the avoidant to experience connection without panic. And in that space, something profound begins to happen. The avoidant starts to see that their own walls aren't protecting them anymore, they're imprisoning them. The empath's love acts as a mirror, reflecting back a version of themselves they had forgotten, open, soft, and capable of real closeness. For the super empath, this dynamic also serves as a mirror. They are reminded of their own depth, their own emotional power, and the importance of discernment. Their love shows them the difference between helping and healing, between being compassionate and being consumed. They see that their ability to sense others so deeply is both a gift and a responsibility. The empath learns that love isn't proven through endurance, but through awareness, the awareness of when to stay, when to give, and when to let go. In witnessing the avoidant struggle with vulnerability, they also learn to honor their own emotional boundaries. The mirror effect between these two souls is not always gentle. It can be intense, even painful, because it brings hidden fears to the surface. The avoidant is forced to confront the emptiness behind their emotional armor, while the empath faces their tendency to overextend. Yet, this very discomfort is what sparks growth. The avoidant begins to see that intimacy doesn't have to threaten their independence, it can actually expand it by offering emotional fulfillment. The empath begins to realize that love is not about carrying someone's wounds, but about showing them their capacity to heal themselves. In this reflection, both individuals discover the truth of love's purpose. It's not to complete another person, but to awaken something within them. The super empath's love becomes a silent teacher, reminding the avoidant that vulnerability is not weakness, but strength. And for the avoidant, that realization lingers long after distance is created. It's why they return, time and time again, drawn back to the mirror that showed them who they could become if they ever stopped running. One of the most misunderstood forms of emotional power is the ability to remain still when someone pulls away. For the super empath, this is where their true strength lies. Unlike those who chase, plead, or try to fix what's slipping away, the empath understands that love cannot be forced into alignment. When an avoidant begins to withdraw, most people react with panic, trying to restore the connection through persuasion or overgiving, but the super empath moves differently. They sense the fear behind the distance, the self-protective reflex that makes the avoidant retreat, and instead of chasing, they hold space. Their silence is not indifference, it is wisdom. They know that chasing an avoidant only pushes them further away, while presence without pressure allows them to feel safe enough to return in their own time. The avoidant is not accustomed to that kind of emotional response. They expect resistance, confrontation, or emotional drama, all of which confirm their belief that intimacy equals loss of peace. But the empath does not play that role. They stand in their power quietly, radiating emotional steadiness rather than desperation. This calm unsettles the avoidant in a different way. It disarms them because it removes the control they usually maintain through distance. Suddenly, they are faced with someone who isn't trying to pull them back, yet whose energy they cannot easily detach from. The absence of chasing creates a powerful contrast. It forces the avoidant to confront their own avoidance rather than blame it on another's intensity. For the super empath, this restraint doesn't come from coldness. It comes from self-awareness. They know the difference between love and self-abandonment. They understand that being available to someone doesn't mean erasing themselves for that person's comfort. By choosing not to chase, they are honoring both their love and their boundaries. That balance makes their presence magnetic. The avoidant, who is used to people bending or breaking to keep their attention, begins to see the empath as something rare, someone who can care deeply yet remain whole. That integrity becomes irresistible because it communicates a kind of emotional maturity the avoidant has never fully encountered. In that quiet strength, the empath also reclaims their own energy. They stop defining their worth through another's closeness or distance. Instead, they focus on alignment. If the connection is meant to return, it will do so naturally. This detachment isn't a game, it's a declaration of self-respect. It says, I will meet you halfway, but I won't chase you into your fear. That message reverberates deeply within the avoidant, stirring a level of reflection that no words could evoke. Over time, they realize that the empath's stillness feels safer than their own solitude. This is why the avoidant keeps circling back. They are drawn to the energy of someone who can love without losing themselves. The empath's calm presence becomes a kind of emotional gravity, powerful yet effortless. And while the avoidant may not understand it immediately, they feel it profoundly. The power of the empath is not in pursuit, it is in patience. Not in trying to prove love, but in knowing that true connection never needs to be forced to exist. Healing between an avoidant and a super empath begins the moment awareness enters the space between them. The avoidant often moves through relationships unconsciously, driven by fear of entrapment, rejection, or emotional exposure. They run from intimacy without realizing that what they're truly running from is their own vulnerability. The super empath, on the other hand, is driven by a deep need to connect and to heal not just others, but often themselves through others. When these two meet, their patterns collide in a way that forces growth. Yet true transformation only happens when awareness replaces reaction. The empath begins to see that they are not meant to rescue the avoidant, and the avoidant begins to see that their distance is not protecting them but isolating them. This shared recognition marks the beginning of healing. The super empath's awakening is one of the most powerful shifts in this dynamic. For a long time, they may mistake their compassion for duty, believing that their purpose is to show the avoidant how to love. But with awareness, they begin to understand that their love is not a lifeline, but a lesson. They realize that they are the mirror through which the avoidant can glimpse their own emotional truth. This understanding frees the empath from the endless cycle of overgiving and disappointment. They no longer see their worth through the avoidant's capacity to receive. Instead, they recognize that their role was to introduce the avoidant to a different experience of love, one rooted in acceptance and honesty, but not to carry them toward healing. The empath learns that love offered in awareness does not demand outcome. It simply plants a seed. For the avoidant, that seed of awareness can be life-changing. Their encounters with the super empath often linger long after the relationship ends because the empath's presence exposes them to a level of emotional safety they've never known. Over time, the avoidant begins to question their own defenses, why they withdraw, why they suppress, why they fear being seen. The empath's steady love becomes a reference point for what healthy vulnerability feels like. They start to realize that love isn't supposed to feel like a loss of control, but rather a space of freedom. Even if they struggle to stay, they carry that imprint within them, the memory of connection without demand, love without suffocation, and honesty without judgment. Healing then becomes mutual. The empath learns boundaries, the avoidant learns trust. The empath learns to protect their energy without closing their heart, while the avoidant learns to open their heart without feeling threatened. Their connection, whether it continues or not, serves as a catalyst for inner evolution. It reminds both that love's purpose is not to bind or fix, but to awaken. Through awareness, the empath steps into self-worth, and the avoidant steps toward emotional courage. And even if their paths diverge, both walk away changed, one standing stronger in love of self, the other carrying the quiet memory of a love that finally felt safe. In the end, the dance between the avoidant and the super empath is not a story of chasing or losing, but one of awakening. It teaches that love is not meant to fix, possess, or rescue. It is meant to reveal who we truly are beneath our fears. The super empath learns that their compassion is a strength, not a burden, and the avoidant learns that vulnerability is not weakness, but freedom. When awareness replaces reaction, both rise into their highest selves, no longer bound by old patterns, but guided by growth and truth. Thank you for listening, for opening your heart to understanding the beauty and complexity of human connection, and for allowing this message to remind us all that love, at its purest, is not about holding on, it's about healing.